is an economic and social challenge. People of various income levels need a place to live in an increasingly expensive city where they work and where we need them to work. And I'm gratified by the fact that increasing numbers of business leaders, represented by some in those rooms, are beginning to realize that is not just a social issue. It's just not an issue you read about in the paper. It's a serious economic issue if we're going to have the people continue to live in the city and be able to come to the jobs that won't carry with those jobs a level of income that will allow people to afford to live in a very expensive city. We've already begun to change what was a lack of priority placed on this affordable housing issue during the last few years. We've begun to address that. We're going to continue to address that and begin to look at the targets that we set for ourselves as something that is very serious in the best interests of the city and its economy. I believe the solution lies in properly incentivized private and nonprofit housing providers. They know how to build housing, they know how to get it done, and if we make it easier for them to do so, they will produce for us. We will also be moving forward with our poverty reduction strategy. Addressing poverty is not something that's going to be done overnight, but we will take some steps forward. There are thousands of kids living in poverty in this city, in every part of this city. And I think you would agree with me that that is not acceptable. And our 20-year plan, and it is a 20-year plan, will start to or continue to invest in things like nutrition and transit and job training and housing to help lift these families out of poverty and connect them with employment and with housing and with increased opportunities. I continue to believe, as I always have, that the most effective way in which we're going to help people be lifted out of poverty is through a secure job, and that's why growing the economy, as I said at the outset, has got to be a fundamental priority for all three governments working together. But there are other things we can do to give people a hand up to ensure that they have access to opportunity. As our city grows, we also need to be ambitious about our public space, pursuing opportunities like the wonderful recent announcement to transform the space underneath the Gardiner Expressway, a project that's being funded by a generous private donation from Judy and Will Matthews. And if I stood up here and said thank you to them again, it'll mean I only have about 6,000 more thank yous to offer people like that, who not only had the money that they were prepared to give, but had the vision to come forward and say this is the kind of thing in the public realm that we want to finance to help make this a great city. There's a lot of development going on in the city, and we simply have to, especially given the kind of development that it is, that doesn't carry with it backyards and front yards and family rooms and that kind of thing. We have to make sure that we develop the public realm in such a way as to have spaces for people to walk and play and learn and enjoy their lives. And we cannot continue to create park space 5 or 10 years after the fact. It must happen much more concurrently with the development itself. Substantial improvement is needed here, and Jennifer Keesmaat, who's here today, our chief planner, is already at work on finding ways to do that better and to make sure that we develop that and deliver that public space and those public amenities with the development, not years later. We also need our city to remain culturally vibrant. Toronto's culture is why people like to live here and why they like to visit here as tourists. And it's also a major driver of our economy, and we depend on thousands and thousands of jobs. This year, we restored the Mayor's Evening for the Arts, which had been cancelled by my predecessor, and we raised more than $1 million in one night for the Toronto Arts Council, people stepping forward in attendance at that event to support the arts in their city. It's going to support a program in 22 parks called Arts in the Parks. It's going to be fantastic. I want more people to get involved in this way with this kind of project, through philanthropy and through partnership and through ideas and through the activism of individual citizens and groups. We have to work to bring out the best in our city, especially in the area of culture and the arts, because it is the universal language that ties a diverse population together, and it just transmits that sense of willingness to embrace innovation that we need to attract investment. I happen to believe the arts are fundamental to our economic success because they convey that sense that we're prepared to be innovative, we're prepared to welcome and embrace creative thinkers, and that that's at the heart of what we do and how we live. So that is the vision, and that's the kind of city I think that we all want to build. And so you'd come up logically with the question, well, what's getting in our way? How do we achieve these goals in a responsible and sustainable manner? And I think it has to start with an honest discussion about our city's finances. I've been working on this throughout the entire year that I've been there with our new city manager, Peter Walls, who came through during the course of the year. I've been working with the public servants and, of course, with the members of City Council, all of them, but in particular my colleague and the budget chair, Gary Crawford. But making progress is going to require us to have this conversation publicly as well, not just inside the City Hall. I want Torontonians to better understand where their money goes, the changes that we need to make, and the challenges we face when it comes to ambitious city building. Not just city building, but ambitious city building. If there's one thing that I've learned as mayor, it's that as complex as addressing our budget is, we simply can't just shrug our shoulders and carry on the same path we've been on. The way I see it, we have two problems, which must be separated out from one another and dealt with and understood separately. On the one side, and you see a diagrammatic explanation here of how we spend our money, we have Toronto's operating costs, $11 billion in 2015. Just like your own household, these are the costs, or your own business, these are the costs of paying the bills, keeping the place running. For the city, it represents the services we provide, from shelter support to roads and parks maintenance to big shares, of course, that go to things like operating the TTC and police service and fire and EMS. Each year, the city's operating budget goes up. Some of it necessarily because of, say, hydro costs where we're paying a bill to someone else. In other cases, it's transit subsidies. As we reinvest in transit, there's a cost to that. We don't get full recovery from the fare-paying passengers. We get a substantial amount from them, but not everything, and that's as it should be. There are other increases, though, which just happen a lot of the time without any real explanation or justification. And to try and bring these costs down, my predecessor tried things like large arbitrary cuts to public transit service. I don't think it worked. I don't think it ever will work. That's not the way that you're going to build a great city. It did nothing more, frankly, than hurt people's access to employment and their ability to get around and seek out opportunity and seek employment and be connected to their city. And so I tried a different approach at the beginning of the budget process this year with Gary Crawford by asking city departments to find 2% in efficiencies this year. Much was found, but it is obvious that these measures don't do enough to address the underlying issue we face. And we have to be smarter, and we have to adopt a different kind of discipline. So there you have the number right there, $11 billion with the operating budget. What's the answer? What's the problem? Well, I think the answer is we've got to change the budget process, because what goes on now is not destined to find the best value for money for that $11 billion. Year to year, what happens is that our budget process focuses on new spending, what's going to be spent above and beyond what was spent the year before. We are asked to approve or deny new costs without enough discussion of what we're already spending or the results that it produces, or in some cases doesn't produce, if we're honest, because it's no different than any other organization. There are some things that work better than others. That is not acceptable. So what will change? Well, we're going to be looking to freeze discretionary spending. There should be, and I would hope in this budget coming up, there will be no increases to things like materials and supplies and conferences and seminars and entertaining expenses and non-essential training without being able to demonstrate a clear benefit to the public. What you get is, if you look at the last 3 years' averages in many of these lines down the budget, and I've spent the time to actually do it, is a number of average for the last 3 years on a given line, and then inexplicably there's a 15% increase provided for in this year's budget. And in the past, people examined that number a little bit, but even when questions were asked, there weren't necessarily specific answers given as to why it would go up 15%. Those are the kinds of things we're going to have to say, you know what, just like a lot of other households and businesses do, we're just going to have to make do with what we had last year in a number of these areas, which I assure you will not affect the delivery of services to people. They won't. They have a lot to do with what goes on inside that building, but not a lot to do with providing services to people. People will not and must not notice services to be diminished as a result of that kind of a change. We have to be more efficient. We have to be more efficient. I'll cite an example that we're underway looking at now, but it's going to be repeated over and over again, and you can do these things one at a time and do them carefully. We have right now in the City of Toronto at least 7 different organizations that have real estate holdings across the city. And with those holdings go, in each case under the present arrangements, separate departments for real estate with lawyers and consultants and managers and people who generally deal with real estate. We will soon receive a report that I requested on how to consolidate these. I think we can do a much better job of actually managing our real estate, which after all belongs to us and to the city in the broadest sense. But beyond that, I think it's going to be done at a substantial saving to the people, because we won't need, nor should we have, 7 different real estate departments. And once we've finished with that one, we will move on to the next one. And I won't speculate on what it might be, although some of you could probably guess on different areas that might be deserving of this attention. The final thing we have to do, besides doing budgeting differently and looking for areas to achieve this kind of efficiency, is to fight to keep taxes low as low as we possibly can. This is entirely possible, and it is absolutely necessary. It will also demonstrate that we are taking a disciplined approach to spending seriously, and that we won't just raise taxes to cover what seems often to be just an automatic increase in costs, as I made reference earlier. You can see here from this particular graph that when those people say to me, as some do, we should just throw in the towel and just raise taxes and deal with things in that manner, we are already in a situation where the rate of residential property tax increase has outstripped the rate of inflation. You can see it right there. Those are just facts. And I can't accept the fact that we would just continue to do that and not insist on finding greater efficiency inside the government and taking a keener look at how we spend the existing money. Because I know that the average citizen simply can't afford or sustain the approach that just says, just keep raising taxes. And I'm not the only mayor that's reached this conclusion. Across Canada and beyond, governments have been clear that higher taxes cannot be the only answer. So that's one side of the equation. We're not going to make arbitrary cuts, and we don't accept unchecked expenditure growth. We have to be much smarter than that. So that's the operating side, and then we come to the capital side. Capital costs, money meant for new projects. In your life, of course, as you know, in your business, it would be for a new piece of equipment. In household life, it would be to put on a new roof or get a new car or one of those kinds of things. And this illustration shows you that we have currently $17.9 billion in unfunded projects on the books for the period 2016 to 2025. So these are projects that have been approved by the City Council, but with no available money to pay for them. Often these aren't the sexiest projects or the ones that you read about in the papers, but they're very important items that we have to move forward with. I'll mention one, for example, an obscure-sounding project like flood protection on the lower Don River. If we don't move ahead with that, we will not be able to develop our portlands. And the portlands represent the potential to create a second downtown with tens of thousands of jobs and billions of dollars in economic activity and value. To pay for this, and all the other approved projects without funding would require, for example, a raise in the residential property tax by a whopping 53%. So that is clearly unacceptable. But we do need to complete these projects. City building requires us to do these things. In that sense, I give credit to the past city councils. They did approve an ambitious program to build a great city. We need to build transit and housing and infrastructure, but we have to find a way to pay for them. We do, at the moment, have an unprecedented opportunity to move forward on this through partnership with our new federal government. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau campaigned on a city platform, and Toronto delivered him every single one of its ridings. And now his $20 billion infrastructure pledge has the potential to make a major impact on Toronto's priority projects, from transit to social housing repairs to public works priorities and, for example, the Portland remediation that I referred to a moment ago. And working together with Premier Wynne at Queen's Park, I think that our three governments are aligned on what it is we want to achieve.